So the first stop on our walking tour around Valley Forge is going to be here at the home of Brigadier General Henry Knox. Brigadier General Henry Knox was the chief artillery officer throughout the Revolutionary War. He was one of Washington's most trusted senior officers and generals. He stayed here throughout the winter of 1777, throughout 1778. And the way I'm going to set up this walking tour, ladies and gentlemen, is if I stop to talk about every single person, I would be at every location for easily over an hour plus. So we're just going to throw out a few quick fun facts about each person and location that we stop at along the way. So, Henry Knox here. A lot of people don't know this. Henry Knox set up the logistics and planned the crossing of the Delaware, December 25th, and into the night of the early morning hours of December 26th, 1776. When we crossed the Delaware, ladies and gentlemen, we did so thanks to the logistics of Henry Knox here. As we talked about, Henry Knox was the chief artillery officer throughout the Revolutionary War. He played a key role at the Battle of the Brandywine in what's called the final defense. He set up the semicircle that gave the Continental Army essentially the ability to escape down Concord Road, because the Battle of the Brandywine was one of the single longest day battles for the Continental Army throughout the Revolutionary War, and it was one of the most bloody battles as well. So without General Knox here and General Greene setting up the final defense of the Battle of the Brandywine, it's safe to say the Continental Army might not ever have even made it here to Valley Forge. Now, another quick fun fact here about General Henry Knox is he was on the court-martial. He was on the court-martial that brought the charges against, both exposed the charges against Benedict Arnold, and then he voted, obviously, to convict him. So General Knox here, he would have been training the revolutionary forces up over that hill at the artillery park. He would have been training about 650 men. We're going to end this video at the artillery park. But what we're going to do here is we're here in the southwestern section of Valley Forge. And from here, we are going to move eastward up that hill through the National Arch Memorial. We'll go to the Muhlenberg Brigade, where everybody, most famously associates the log cabin huts with Valley Forge. Then we'll move to the north and then cut back west into the northwest section of the Valley Forge Encampment, where General Washington is set up his headquarters at the Isaac Potts House. And then from there, we are going to go to the artillery park to wrap it up. By the time we left here in 1778, General Knox would have had about 40 to 50 pieces under his command. And what a beautiful place to be. As you can see from the huts and the juxtaposition here in the future video, the high command and the officers had it really good. So now we're going to head eastward. We're going to move up towards the Pennsylvania columns. We're going to move up towards the National Arch Memorial. And we're going to stop at the General Anthony Wayne statue before heading on to the Muhlenberg Brigade huts. As I said, those are the most famous, log huts that people associate with Valley Forge. That's where we'll go from here. And then, like I said, we're going to wrap around on the north section of the encampment, from the northeast section all the way over to the northwest section. And then we're going to end up over that ridge there. We're ended up there at the artillery park. So as we continue eastward here on our walking tour of Valley Forge, we come to the monument of Brigadier General Anthony Wayne. He was a Pennsylvania native. He was actually a native to Chester County. What this location now where we are at is modern day Montgomery County, but General Wayne here would have been a resident of the original 3 counties laid out by William Penn. Early 1775, he was elected to the Pennsylvania Safety Committee along the sides of the ranks of Benjamin Franklin, John Dixon, and Robert Morris. But by the end of the year, he would be removed from his position for being such an outspoken advocate of raising a militia here in Pennsylvania. The Quakers who had elected him to that position to represent Chester County were obviously well-known pacifists. That's why, in part, they left England to begin with. Quakers, if you did not know that, they objected to the Revolutionary War simply because they were pacifists. Many of them actually sat in prayer as the battles were going on. General Wayne here played a key role at the Battle of the Brandywine. He was the commander of the Pennsylvania line. Sadly, just about 2 weeks after the Battle of the Brandywine, General Wayne's camp here would be attacked in the night, September 20th and the 21st, by the British, who snuck up on us, and they used their bayonets primarily to essentially hack down 53 Continental soldiers. It is called the Massacre at Paoli because the British, in the words of the own Continental officers who observed what was going on there, they gave no quarter to the men who were attempting to surrender. And again, because it was primarily being bayonets that were used, it was quite a bloody affair. The Paoli Massacre actually became one of the biggest rally cries throughout the Revolutionary War. It's called Remember Paoli. So General Wayne would have been encamped here in the winter of 1777 throughout 1778. And I suggest if you guys are fascinated by his history, you should go on and check out more. So as we head eastward here on our walking tour down from the Brigadier General Anthony Wayne Monument, we come down here and we see one of these single solo huts, log cabins. This is a reconstruction. But these are the types of log cabins that the 12,000 soldiers would have stayed in, and there was nearly 400 women and children. They were built to drop down 2 feet to help give natural protection. Would have been a fireplace in the back. You would have bunks here on the side for the soldiers. And again, these tiny little huts, which, you know, in Manhattan would go for $2,000, $3,000 a unit. It would have housed up to 12 men in here. And during one of the coldest winters in recorded Pennsylvania history. And they managed to endure. And as you can see, you know, they would have done a good job to try to, you know, fortify it and solidify the outside, but the elements still definitely would have gotten through, and the fireplace could have only done so much. So that's why it's estimated about 2,000 people of the 12,000 here at Valley Forge sadly passed away and perished, primarily due to the cold and the sickness that was brought about through the cold and the ability, or inability I should say, to really protect themselves from the harsh conditions. So these are really cool as a Pennsylvania native. These are what's called the Pennsylvania columns here at Valley Forge. These columns are put here specifically to honor every single soldier in the Continental Army from Pennsylvania. Take a closer look at them. Pennsylvania columns, ladies and gentlemen. If you had any family members or kin that served in the Revolutionary War and were a part of the Continental Army, those columns there to honor them. And from here, we are going to cut right through the field over to the National Memorial Arch. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is really cool. This is the Memorial Arch meant to commemorate the arrival of General Washington and the 12,000 people under his command. They would have come up from that southeast section over Gulf Road there into Valley Forge. You can see that vehicle coming there. This arch is a simplified version of the Arch of Titus that you would find and can still find in Rome right now. Built 81, year 81 is the Arch of Titus. And this here is meant to be a simplified version of it. Again, it's meant to honor the arrival of the 12,000 troops and about 400 women and children that came here with the Continental Army. And for a time period, if you can believe it, this would have been the 4th largest city. When General Washington and the Continental Army arrived here, December 19th, 1777, up over the southeastern section here of Valley Forge. Nowadays it's called Gulf Road there. Valley Forge was specifically picked, as you can see, because it's a high plateau and it gives a natural barrier to the British who were encamped down in Philadelphia, down there in the southeast. This is really, really cool. Absolutely massive. If you want to feel small, walk through that. So from here, we're going to go over to the Muhlenberg Brigade. That's where the Muhlenberg Brigade stayed, those famous log cabins. That was where the Virginia troops would have been staying. And there would have been about 1,500 to 2,000 of those cabins pretty much lined out in a row for the majority of the Continental forces here at Valley Forge. So this is modern day Gulf Road. This is where the Continental Army would have come up, ladies and gentlemen. 12,000 strong would have come into Valley Forge here from that southeast section. And what an absolutely beautiful place to be in the springtime. Obviously, we know how hard the winter was, but if you can come out here and visit in the spring and or summer, I would definitely suggest it. And honestly, even in the fall, when the fall foliage is going on, it is absolutely a gorgeous place to be, a great place to bring your family. And it's so rich in American history, particularly, obviously, Revolutionary War history. So if you're a history nerd or history buff, I would encourage everybody that could to get out to Valley Forge at least once in their life. Now, on our way over to the Muhlenberg Brigade location where the Virginia troops were, there's a great monument here erected by the grateful Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the memory of their soldiers who served here at Valley Forge, December 19th, 1777 throughout June 19th, 1778. And I mean it sincerely when I say thank you to each and every one of you whose kin served in the Massachusetts regiments and served in the Revolutionary War. So quick heads up, if you do come to Valley Forge to do the walking tour, make sure you have your walking shoes on, maybe even a backpack, because the Muhlenberg Brigade on the southeastern section of Valley Forge is all the way over there. We've easily walked over a mile plus now from where General Knox's headquarters are. But I really like this shot because here we are on the southern side of Valley Forge in that chapel in the background. No, you're good. You can walk through, sir. Don't worry about me. Yeah, I'll never complain about that. Thank you, though. Yeah, guys, public places are for everybody, you know. I'm far from being an influencer, right? You can always walk through my shop. This is a public place for everybody to be. But so here's just another great example of the beauty and the vastness of Valley Forge. So here we are on the southern location right now. We're about south central on Valley Forge, and all the way in the background, the foreground, is where Washington's Chapel is. And as you can see, if we're going all we are, we're going to walk all the way down there to the Muhlenberg Brigade, where the Virginia troops were housed. Then we're going to come down there over to the redoubts. We're going to show you what the redoubts were all about, and then we're going to stop down there at Washington's Chapel and a few other locations along the way before getting down to Washington's headquarters there in the northwest section of Valley Forge. And then we're going to wrap it up by coming all the way back up to the artillery park. So as we approach the Muhlenberg Brigade location where the Virginia troops would have been housed here in the very famous log cabins of Valley Forge, I want to talk about this trail name real quick and who it's named after. Joseph Plumb Martin, a 15-year-old Connecticut volunteer who was encamped here at the Valley Forge encampment through that winter of 1777 throughout 1778. And I want to take a moment to read what he had to say, right? Private Yankee Doodle were his memoirs. That was what it was published after. That made him a historical figure. So he wrote about the encampment as this: our prospect was indeed dreary. In our miserable condition, to go into the wild woods and build habitations to stay in, not live in, referring to those habitations you see there in the background, in such a weak, starved, and naked condition was appalling to the highest degree, as he wrote. But dispersion, I believe, was not at the thought, at least I did not think it, because we had engaged in the defense of our injured country, and we were willing, nay, we were determined to persevere for as long as we possibly could throughout the hardships that were not altogether intolerable. So Joseph Plumb Martin, he wrote Private Yankee Doodle, 15 years old when he signed up as a Connecticut volunteer in the Continental Army. It's a really cool bus. If you guys ever want to take a bus tour, Valley Forge trolley tours. And now, these are the Muhlenberg Brigade locations, ladies and gentlemen. This is where the Virginia troops would have been housed in these log cabins. These are all reconstructions of the original cabins. The cabins themselves, as you just heard Joseph Plumb Martin describe, they were never built to live in. They were only built just to be able to stay in for a temporary period of time. You would have had about 1,500 to 2,000 of these log cabins just lined up going all the way down the field here. And essentially every single state, right, had their regiments together. So this is where the Virginia regiments would have been under General Muhlenberg, who poetically enough, interestingly enough, ironically enough, whatever you want to call it, was a Pennsylvania general. Wow, look at this. So this is where up to 12 people would sleep, 12 Continental soldiers at a time. Remember, there was about 12,000 soldiers and about 400 women and children. So they would have slept stacked up here on the sides. They would have had their fireplace here to try to keep it as warm as possible. But you can see with the cracks, right, the elements would have certainly got in. And that's why, again, out of the 12,000 people that came here, up to about 2,000 of them sadly died of pretty much freezing to death and sickness born out of the elements and the inability to really protect themselves from the elements. The winter of 1777, 1778 was one of the coldest winters on record. We actually just had an extremely cold winter here all throughout Pennsylvania and the Northeast. Imagine trying to make it through one of those winters that we just had in a log cabin hut like this.
No way. Any way you stack this thing up, you are going to lose. I do admire your naivete. Questions? Yeah, this is incredible. Honestly, the more you learn about the American Revolution, the more unbelievable this thing gets. When I was first researching this, my first epiphany was, wait, somebody told me we won. It just doesn't make sense. So any questions before we bounce back up?
So we just eavesdropped a little bit on a guided tour. Man, these huts are absolutely fascinating, ladies and gentlemen. And what an iconic image. And again, you got a picture, you know, these are just a handful of these log cabin replicas. If you can imagine, there would have been 1,500 to almost 2,000 of them, given the numbers of people that they had to store here. So here we are in the southeastern section of Valley Forge, and we are going to walk right up on that redoubt there. The redoubts played a key role in the fortification of Valley Forge, and as you can see, this one is strategically set up in the southeastern corner. If I'm not mistaken, this is Redoubt Number Two, and it's set up in the southeastern corner, right, to prevent any type of frontal approach from the British coming there from Virginia. So we're going to walk up here to this redoubt, and we're going to take a closer look at it. Redoubt is a French word for essentially a place to retreat. And we had 5 total redoubts, all strategically set up here throughout the encampment of Valley Forge. I do believe we learned our lesson from Wayne's encampment, which was not protected. And I understand why he had to position himself so close to the British. I'm not criticizing him for that. But I believe that we learned our lesson from the Paoli massacre, as well as we'll talk about at General Washington's headquarters and why they're located where they are. I believe they learned their lesson from the Battle of the Brandywine, because General Howe and General Cornwallis's forces were able to cross over not one but two fords. They crossed over both the western and then the eastern branch of the Brandywine River. Washington had no idea they were there until about 2 o'clock. That's when he finally was alerted to the fact that 11,000 Crown forces had already successfully crossed not one but two fords and were coming up Birmingham Hill to crash into the Continental right flank there. So wow, what a great shot of these redoubts. Again, redoubt number 2 here is strategically located, and as you can see, this high plateau area gave them great vantage points, especially back in the day without all of these modern day structures here, of any potential frontal assault, because the British, again, they would have been coming from Philadelphia there in the southeast. So this is redoubt number 2, if I remember my map locations correctly. You would have had massive pikes. I mean, these are massive pikes, right, to deter any type of, in particular, cavalry trying to come up through there. Obviously, if you're a person, you're not going to be impaled down that, right? But what it also does is designed to break up forces, so you can't run up that in one single cohesive line by any means. So redoubt number 2 here. And this is an advanced redoubt, as it's called, right? And I think it's called an advanced redoubt because it's not just made out of the earth in and of itself, but it's actually reinforced here by the wood that we see. And as we can see, we got our cannons protecting it. Let's take a look and see what this has to say. So as we talked about, right, there was 5 redoubts that were positioned all on high points. Each were visible to each other, and the officers would actually use telescopes to observe and communicate with one another visually. So you see that, the way that is going, that goes out to redoubt number 3. Redoubt number 3 is closer to the artillery park out there all the way on the southwestern section of Valley Forge. Redoubt number 4 is over there by General Washington's headquarters. So these are really cool, ladies and gentlemen. Look at these. These are replicas, but these are the types of cannons that General Knox would have had under his control in the artillery. By the end of Valley Forge, we had over 40 to 50 pieces under his command. Absolutely beautiful day. The British remarked, in particular because of the location that we picked, and these redoubts right here, the British remarked when they were asked, why didn't you try to attack Valley Forge? One officer, one high-ranking officer said he did not think it was physically possible to engage in any type of frontal assault on Valley Forge. As you can see, Continental Army, this was strategically picked out. This would have gave them a great view over anybody coming at them from miles and miles and miles away. And as I said earlier, right, this is just my 2 cents as a historian, but I do believe we learned our lesson from the massacre at Paoli, General Wayne's encampment, which was not fully fortified. As we talked about earlier, I understand why he had to be that close to the British lines. And I do believe we learned our lesson from Battle of the Brandywine, which is why Washington picked his headquarters on the Schuylkill River down there. And so we'll talk about that next. Now here we are at the section of Valley Forge that honors the Black Patriots of the American Revolution. Here's this beautiful monument that was erected to honor all the patriots of African American descent. We're here on the northern side of the encampment at Valley Forge. Over 700 African American and black soldiers would have been here at Valley Forge. Over 100 of them would have been from Rhode Island's 1st Regiment. We're going to talk about General Varnum in the future when we get down to his quarters and how he actually reshaped the entirety of the Rhode Island 1st Regiment. In 1778, it became the first racially integrated regiment there from Rhode Island. So if you're ever here at Valley Forge, please come pay an honor here to the Black Patriots of the American Revolution. So down below there in the background, it's closed right now to the public, but that's the Maurice Stevens house. That was built in 1816. The Stevens family bought up a large portion of this land that you see. The Grand Parade is behind that. We'll talk about that here coming up. But the Stevens family bought a majority of this land from William Penn back in the mid-1700s. And it's closed again, as I said, to the public right now. But that's the Maurice Stevens house down there, built in 1816. Wow. And he had such a wonderful view of the field behind it. It might not look like much, but that field behind it is where the Continental Army transformed into a single cohesive fighting force. It's called the Grand Parade, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in depth. Here on the right side of Valley Forge, on the right side of the road, I should say, this is the Washington Memorial Chapel. Now, on the left side here, this is the Waterman's Monument, right? This is a 50-foot tall granite obelisk that was erected in 1901 by the Daughters of the Revolution. And this actually marks the only known grave site of a person who passed away here at Valley Forge. And that was Samuel Lieutenant John Waterman of Rhode Island. He died here on April 23rd, 1778. So that's pretty much a shame if you think about it. I mean, he made it through that entirely brutal winter, only to get to about where we are right now. Here we are in springtime. This is being filmed here April 12th, 2026. But yeah, that is the Waterman's Monument. This is the only known grave site of somebody who perished here. Again, of the 12,000 people that arrived in that southeast section of Valley Forge, over 2,000 would perish. Down below us, what a great shot of the Grand Parade. And we're going to talk about the Grand Parade a little bit more in depth, but yet we still have to get down to General von Steun's statue. It would be, in my opinion, it wouldn't be proper to talk about the Grand Parade without talking about him and the ways in which he transformed the Continental Army, as I said earlier, into a single cohesive fighting force. So it might not look like much, but this is where the Continental Army really turned the tides of the Revolutionary War by going from being a kind of a hodgepodge group of Continentals fighting with different tactics from different states and different state militias to becoming one singular cohesive fighting force. And this is where the French alliance would also be celebrated in May of 1778, just about 2 weeks actually, sadly, after the passing of John Waterman. We would have what's called the French Alliance Celebration Day. In the United States, the Continental Army showcased to the world, those who attended, all the skills that they had learned down there in the Grand Parade. And it was well noted. A lot of people noticed how uniformed and disciplined and professional the Continental Army became. So without General von Steun and all his efforts down there in the Grand Parade, it is pretty likely to imagine that we would not have actually, in fact, won the Revolutionary War. So I gotta say, I think it's a real shame that they would put the monument of Major General Nathanael Greene here, which is one of Washington's most capable and trusted senior officers throughout the Revolutionary War. They put him right next to a pretty loud and noisy road here. Well, let's just talk about Nathanael Greene, and let's try to get away from the road so maybe some of you guys can hear me in the process, right? Nathanael Greene was one of Washington's most senior and trusted capable officers throughout the entirety of the Revolutionary War. He made his real name for himself down there in the Southern Theater, and he played a key role at the Battle of the Brandywine with General Knox in that final defense of the Continental Army. It was General Greene and General Knox who set up that final defense there. Now, in October of 1780, Washington appointed Greene
the commander of the Continental Army down there in the Southern Theater. And it was Greene who used guerrilla warfare tactics to constantly pester the British throughout 1780 into 1781, all the way up to the Battle of Yorktown. He was not at the Siege of Yorktown, to be specific, but it was his tactics taking over the Continental Army down there in the Southern Strategy, and in particular those guerrilla warfare tactics that really forced the British to give up their control of the South. So, this is to honor Major General Nathanael Greene, right next to, poetically, right next to Washington's Memorial Chapel. And again, I mean, he's, you know, if you look at it facing out, he is to the right of Washington's Memorial, and he was most certainly one of Washington's most trusted right-hand men. Now we got this really cool little cabin right next to him on a very busy road. So this log cabin in particular was erected by the daughters of the Philadelphia chapter of the Revolution. So thank you to all the daughters of the Revolution, in particular those who made your donations here to help reconstruct this hut here, the type of hut that you would have found in Valley Forge. Now from here we're going to go down to General Varnum's location, and then from there we're going to go on to General Washington's headquarters. So this placard, ladies and gentlemen, this monument was put here to honor General James Varnum, who started out as a captain in the Kentish Guard. After the battles of Lexington and Concord, he was promoted to a colonel of one of the regiments of Rhode Island. He was encamped here in the winter of 1777 throughout 1778. His regiment, his Rhode Island regiment, was also at the siege of Boston. They helped liberate the city from the British on March 17th, 1776. And as we talked about earlier at the Black Patriots Monument, General Varnum played a key role in the integration of the regiments there in Rhode Island, in particular in the 1st Regiment, which is where he was the colonel of. Over 100 Black Patriots from Rhode Island were here at Valley Forge, thanks to the advocation of integrated troops on behalf of Brigadier General James Varnum. And his monument, his placard, sits right in front of Redoubt Number 1 here. Redoubt Number 1 gives you a much better view of what the actual natural fortifications would have looked like. The one we saw at top, Number 2, Redoubt Number 2, is an advanced redoubt. Now, Redoubt Number 1 here, just like the other 5 redoubts, are placed in key high strategic locations to make sure the British could not just sneak up on us, especially the way that they did at the Battle of the Brandywine and at the Paoli Massacre. So this would have been Redoubt Number 1. Redoubt Number 1 would have protected the northern side of this encampment. Schuylkill River is about 300 yards down below. And let's read our placard together. Guarding the bridge. Redoubt Number 1 here, as we looked at, is guarding the northern side of the encampment here. It looks down over Sullivan's Bridge, which is over there at the Schuylkill River, behind that tree line about 300 yards down there. This side of the encampment in particular would have been protected by Brigadier General and his men from Rhode Island. They would have stayed in the huts nearby this location too. We can see a replica of the one over there. So remember, all 5 redoubts were strategically built to give the Continental Army the ability to, 1, communicate with each other through the telescopes that we talked about earlier, but 2, more importantly, equally importantly I should say, gives the Continental Army the ability to look out and over the ground down below. Valley Forge as a whole is a high plateau area, and it gives a pretty much a great 360 view of the areas down below, and there's just no way the British could have snuck up on us. So this monument honors Major General Friedrich Wilhelm Baron von Steuben. Von Steuben here is the gentleman who's credited with taking the Continental Army and essentially making them into the United States Army. He made them into one singular cohesive fighting force. And he did that down below in these very unsuspecting fields. That field down there, ladies and gentlemen, is called the Grand Parade. And it's where the School of War took place. What a perfect way to put it. General von Steuben here was one of the top Prussian officers and generals. Came over to the United States specifically to help discipline and create a professional Continental Army. What he would do is he would write out his notes several days in advance so all of his information could be disseminated down throughout the chain of command. And they would come out here and they would practice their maneuvers. And a lot of times what he would do is he would use the commander-in-chief's own guard. He would use about 120 of the elite soldiers in the Continental Army to showcase how the maneuver should be done. So essentially, kind of like in sports analogy, he'd be the first team out there, let everybody see how it should be done, then everybody would work to replicate that. And he really helped unify the Continental Army here. We had different ways of going about different battle tactics because you had different states and different state militias who believed they should do this or that in training. It was von Steuben here under the Prussian Army and his leadership that helped bring the Continental Army, as I said earlier, into the actual United States Army that we would know it as today. And down here below on May 6, 1778 was the Grand Parade. This is where we showcased to the world, including the French, celebrating our French alliance, that the United States and the Continental Army had finally arrived. We would not have done that without General von Steuben here. Again, he was one of the most capable and senior commanders and officers in the Prussian Army. He played a key role in developing the United States and the Continental Army from essentially a hodgepodge group of militias using different tactics and different training regiments, and brought them into one singular cohesive fighting force. So while it might not look like much, ladies and gentlemen, this is where the Continental Army would train, get ready, and actually become the fighting force that was required over us in the next 3 years from 1778 into 1781 at the Siege of Yorktown, which is considered the last major battle of the Revolutionary War. So if you're ever here, check out the Grand Parade, check out this placard here showcasing the School of War, and pay your respects to General von Steuben here, because without him, it's safe to say the United States might not have ever won the Revolutionary War. So before we get down to Washington's headquarters, I wanted to take a look at the Schuylkill River here in the background. I'm not sure if those train lines are active, and it's actually a pretty steep drop off, so I'm not going to find out. But I wanted to showcase to you guys what the northern side of the Valley Forge encampment would have looked here. If you're the British, you would have tried to run up this hill. Again, that rail line was cut out. So if you look at this steep here, I mean, this is a pretty steep embankment to come up. After crossing a river, it's about 200 yards wide, give or take, at its widest point back here on the northern section. So it's not like crossing necessarily Trimble or Jeffreys Ford, which were only about maybe 20, 30 yards in width. Again, maybe that's about 150, a conservative, accurate estimate, about 150 yards in width there. And if you were trying to cross here, Washington's encampment's down there, you would have been in for an absolute slaughter fest, right? We showed you those redoubts. And if you look at this, I mean, if you just look at this hill, if you think about trying to march up this at a fully fortified Continental Army, 12,000 men, 40 to 50 cannons here, obviously not on this ridge, but this is why the one officer in the British command remarked, in particular, the Valley Forge encampment was pretty much impenetrable, and it's why they didn't even try to send any, scouting groups or anything like that to try to pick at our defenses, because they knew it pretty much would have quite literally been an uphill battle for them, and a battle that would have probably resulted in a significant amount of British casualties. So I just wanted to showcase this landscape a bit more because this is such a natural and great fortification here on the northern side of the encampment of Valley Forge. And as we talked about, down over there is Washington's headquarters. So that's where we're heading to next. All right, we made it. This is the famous Isaac Potts house. Isaac Potts rented this home to General Washington in the winter of 1777 throughout 1778. This, ladies and gentlemen, the Isaac Potts house here in the northwestern section of Valley Forge. This would have served as the Continental Army's headquarters right here. And in particular, this is General Washington's personal headquarters. I do believe the building is open, so we're going to be able to walk through it. But wow. This is admittedly my first time ever seeing this in person. I've seen it before in documentaries, and it's kind of surreal to be here, honestly. If you think about all the people that came to this house, not just General Washington, but Marquis de Lafayette, General von Steuben, General Knox, General Greene, members of Congress. This was the place to be, ladies and gentlemen. If you were in the high command of the Continental Army, if you were in Congress, or if you were anybody of influence, this is where you wanted to be. You wanted to be at the Isaac Potts house here, under General Washington's command. I am not going to talk through here, so let's just briefly talk about the upstairs was for the lodging. Downstairs is where all the meetings took place. So all the most important meetings throughout the winter of 1777 throughout 1778 took place right here at the Potts house. So I'm going to be silent as we go in here.
Hi, welcome.
Good afternoon. How you guys doing?
Good, how are you?
Well, thank you.
Been here before?
No, yes, I
Alright,
have.
so you're in the actual house that George Washington worked and slept in for 6 months right here. So that first room for you is for the staff. They do all the paperwork.
Okay.
In there, like a Hamilton, John Lewis, Ken Stillman. Next room over when you're ready is Washington's office. Bedrooms upstairs for you to see. There were 25 to 30 people. They're sleeping everywhere, including the hallways at night. George and Martha get their own room. It is the first room on the left upstairs for you. The structure is original, mostly original. So again, all that paneling in there that you're seeing,
Right.
original.
Wow.
All the floors that you can't walk on are original in there.
Martha was here.
And you're going to use.
Still original?
Yes.
So Marquis de Lafayette, General van Steuben, all of them would have touched that? Wow.
Yep. And they would have met Washington in that second room and Washington staff in that first room.
Man, that's so cool.
Both of them had their own headquarters.
While they were here.
Some of those buildings are in the park today. Some of them are not in the park today. They're all closed to the public for you. But yeah, they would have met Washington very frequently during their time.
So this would have been the place to be.
Yeah, this is where the generals come to see Washington.
Right, if you were high command, you would have been coming here, okay.
Yeah, really Washington's not going to see you.
You're coming to see Washington here, okay. That makes sense, yeah. Wow, what a great piece of history.
Furnishings, reproduction, and period, but all based on inventory of the time period.
Okay.
So like that clock around the corner is from 1760.
Wow. That is remarkable. So as they routed us at Battle of the Brandywine, they burned multiple depots, you're saying?
Yeah, along the way.
Okay.
Yeah. There was the Continental Powder Works magazine off of French Creek, south of Phoenixville.
Excellent.
That was burnt in a mysterious fire. But
Gotcha.
also German forces went there and they torched some buildings because there was
Hashings?
gunpowder. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gunpowder being stored there. There was not weapons. It was more like tomahawks, camp kettles, entrenchment tools.
Okay.
Important stuff.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So they took whatever they could carry with them and then they torched the rest.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah. And that would have been behind you.
All the behind there, okay,
Yeah,
excellent.
yeah,
Wow.
along the creek and further down what is now along 252 because the creek was going to the border of the park.
Okay.
And obviously the creek goes towards Exton, but still, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so wow.
But anyway, yeah, take a look
And,
at the
and,
rest.
are you allowed upstairs?
Oh,
Yeah?
absolutely, whenever you like.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Wow.
Absolutely.
That is so cool.
Yeah. Right there.
Yeah. Nice. Oh.
There you go.
Hello. Hi. Come on in, folks. Feel free to take pictures in here. Welcome to Washington's headquarters.
Boy, the fall.
You're in
Use
the
the
original
handle.
building.
You know what?
George Washington ain't worked and slept in here for 6 months.
I'm gonna
The
use the
majority of the
handle.
structure is original. The steps outside. The paneling in the
Here are the bedrooms.
That's my coworker. That's what we're talking about. Real deal. Furnishings throughout, all based on inventory.
The bedroom.
Broke it all down, and we're very glad they did. That's how we
Wow.
putting a couple antiques.
It would have been absolute chaos in here.
First room for you is for the staff.
But they had it, as you can see, they had it way better than the people in the huts.
Next room over is George Washington's office, and we have bedrooms upstairs. So we can have each one of you can go upstairs when you are ready. As we move back out this hallway to the guest room, right above us right here.
And now their double is gated off. Essentially, once you get up here, I'm not going to try to cross that threshold with the camera. I'm going to pay respect here. But this is really, really cool, ladies and gentlemen. This is Washington's headquarters. This is the third story. You can see 1, 2, 3 different beds. Little table up here, some food and tea, candle lights to work in the evening, a crib. And pardon me. Oh, sorry. No, you're good. So, some of the most important people in United States history would have used this hand.
After the spotlight, believe it or not,
Hessians
do
or
a
Prussian
guest
guy
room,
come in.
which is right above you.
Thank you.
So it gets even smaller. I actually recommend going off to
Am
the
I
side
allowed
to
to
see
go out
the
there?
pictures.
Okay, cool. I didn't want to open
That's
that.
okay. It's
Excellent.
cool. That's why.
Excellent. Okay, cool. All right. So yes, when in doubt, when I'm at historical locations, I always like to defer and show respect. I didn't want to go out that door because it wasn't open, but you are allowed to go out that door. They actually encourage it. Here's where the kitchen would have been, right? Here's where all the meals would have been prepared. Here's where the cooks would have been. Massive fireplace to feed. As he said, there would have been about 20 to 30 people at any given time in the Isaac Potts house there. This is so cool. Now from here, where we're going to come out to is we're going to come out to General Washington's private guard. We're going to go ahead and walk over there. This is called the Commander-in-Chief huts up here. This is where about 120 Continental soldiers who were handpicked to be Washington's personal guard. Washington was here, strategically located on the Schuylkill River there, to prevent any type of British attack. This is where they obviously felt that they were the safest, which is actually pretty fascinating when you look at it geographically. And I will admit, this is where I don't know everything as a historian. I will never claim to know everything. And I believe learning about history is a collective and a communal experience. So if you guys have any insights, why would Washington pick here if you look up that massive hill down there? Unless they thought, right, it was likely the British would attack from essentially one of 3 locations, and that Washington could then go ahead and quickly cross the Schuylkill and get out of here before the British could make their way down this valley. I could be wrong. I'm entirely speculating. If you have a better idea, or if you actually know why they decided to pick this northwestern section, again, this is not on the plateau like a number of the other sections that we looked at the camp here. This is actually down. We're down easily about a quarter mile plus up that ridge line. You know, that's a significant ridge line. But I conclude, I think that's maybe why they did that, is they figured that if the British were going to come, they'd probably come from one of 3 directions. and that it would give General Washington down there in the Isaac Potts house and his personal commander-in-chief guard, 120 men strong. This would have been some of the best fighting forces in the Continental Army. As we talked about at the Grand Parade, these were the men that were selected by General von Steuben to showcase the military tactics to the rest of the other men who would then go ahead and obviously do what they had just seen. So these are the commander-in-chief huts. Built pretty much the same as the rest of the huts. Fascinatingly enough, actually. I mean, 120 men, personal guard to Washington. You think they would have a little bit better accommodations, honestly. I understand 120 men with the amount of homes that they had here, pre-existing properties. Not everybody could have had a home, but yeah, this is where the Washington personal commander-in-chief guard would have been. Just like everybody else's hut, it would have stored up to 12 people in here. They would have had their fireplace at the back, sleeping arrangements on the side. So this is, man, what an absolutely gorgeous day. It feels almost wrong to be here on such a beautiful day, knowing how the cold, harsh winter and elements took so many lives. But there really is nothing else to say, except this is such a beautiful part of the country. Again, that is the Isaac Potts house down below. That was General Washington's headquarters. And this is his commander-in-chief's personal guards. This is where his 120 men would have stayed here. The door's closed, so we're going to leave that is. So from here, next stop on our walking tour is one of the coolest, in my opinion, and I've been looking forward to this whole time just as much as I've been looking to the General Washington house. We're going to walk up this hill and we're going to head over to the artillery park now from here. So this is really cool, ladies and gentlemen. This is the artillery park here. This is where General Knox would have trained 650 Continental soldiers. General Knox, as we talked about in the beginning of the video, shown here in this picture, was a chief artillery officer throughout the Revolutionary War. By the end of the encampment here, we would have had about 40 to 50 pieces under General Knox's command. The artillery park would have housed the majority of the Continentals' artillery and cannons, with the exception of those that would have been put into the redoubts. This location was selected because of where the Redoubt Number 4 is down there by General Washington's headquarters on the northwest section of Valley Forge. Redoubt Number 3 sits up over that hill, and so does General Knox's domicile when he rented a house here from 1777 throughout 1778. Again, these are only replica cannons, but again, these were the cannons that he would have used. He would have had anywhere from 3 to 8 pound cannons under his command. This would have been the area where the Continentals trained about 650 men moving into 1778. A lot of people and a lot of historians, myself included, agree that without this time period and encampment here at Valley Forge and the pivotal training opportunities it provided us, we very well might not have won the Revolutionary War. So these are really, really cool. If you come out to Valley Forge, I would encourage everybody to take the walk down here to the artillery park. You can actually park right next to it if you are, for some reason or another, you can't walk too far. Well, you can park right there in that park and come on over. And to give you guys a viewpoint of how big this place is, that's the memorial arch that we walked through hours ago at this time period. All the way up over that ridge is where Muhlenberg Brigade, the Virginia troops, the log cabin. You pretty much can't see it, but if you were about to go about a mile through that tree line, that is where Washington's Memorial Chapel is. And then Washington's headquarters is about a mile or so that way in the northwestern section of Valley Forge. So this was a massive encampment. If I did not say that earlier, I think I did. This would have been the 4th largest city in the United States at the time when Washington showed up with 12,000 Continental regulars and about 400 women and children. And so I want to wrap up this walking tour just by saying thank you to anybody who took the time to watch this and maybe even watch it all the way to the end. I know that's not easy to do nowadays, myself included. Sometimes I get a little distracted. I just want to send a big thank you for watching. I also want to send a big thank you to those of you who have subscribed. I do appreciate your support. It makes me happy, admittedly, to start to see the channel grow a little bit, because I'm a lot like Peter Gibbons. I do not like my day job, and I would love, if I could in the future, to do more of these virtual walking historical tours. I will get better in the future. This was only my first ever video doing this. It's pretty raw. I got a lot to learn, but I'll just end it on that. I just want to say thank you very much. I appreciate your support, and I hope everybody has a good rest of their day and week. Thank you.